In just 47 seconds, chaos revealed something no one expected. A lion escaped the Portland Evergreen Zoo, but instead of attacking or running wild, he walked straight toward an elderly woman who didn't move an inch. Alarms blared, crowds screamed, guards raised rifles, yet the old lion ignored them all. What happened when he reached her would stun everyone and reveal a truth buried for 30 years. The morning at Portland Evergreen Zoo began with the kind of soft quiet that made people love this corner of Oregon. A thin veil of mist floated just above the pathways, blurring the outlines of benches, lampposts, and the tall pines that stood like silent guardians along the walkways. The air carried the faint smell of wet bark and fresh mulch, the familiar perfume of the zoo after a light dawn drizzle. Staff members moved slowly, the way people do when the day feels predictable. Coffee cups in hand, radios clipped to belts, jackets zipped halfway as they unlocked gates and checked enclosures. A few early visitors wandered past the ticket booth, families with strollers, retirees out for their morning walk, a couple of joggers cooling down after laps around the lake. Everything felt peaceful in the way only early morning can, until the peace cracked. At exactly 8:41 a.m., the first shrill note of the emergency system shattered the quiet. It was so abrupt, so out of place that every bird perched on the railings shot into the air at once. The speakers mounted on the poles crackled with static before a voice boomed across the zoo, sharp enough to slice through the mist. Code red. Code red. Lion escaped enclosure. All visitors evacuate immediately. The words didn't seem real at first. A few people stopped walking, confused, looking around as if expecting someone to explain the announcement. A father leaned forward, hands on his daughter's stroller, frozen in place. A woman holding a camera lowered it slowly in disbelief. But the alarm repeated, louder this time, more urgent, and panic rolled through the plaza like a sudden wave that no one saw coming. The spell of calm broke. And when it broke hard. Parents grabbed their children with shaking hands, calling names over the growing noise. A toddler burst into tears as someone dropped a bag of snacks that scattered across the pavement. Coffee cups hit the ground, splashing across shoes. A group of teenagers sprinted toward the exit, shoving each other in blind fear. Radios crackled wildly as staff scrambled to respond, their voices overlapping in frantic bursts. The mist that once felt peaceful now felt suffocating, thick with confusion and dread. And then someone screamed, pointing toward the main corridor that led to the African Ridge exhibit. A large shadow moved through the fog, slow, heavy, unmistakably alive. As the shape stepped into view, the already frantic crowd grew even louder. Gasps turned into shouts. People stumbled over benches, abandoned backpacks, anything in their way. One man tripped, pulling his wife down with him, scrambling back to his feet as another warning blared overhead. "This is not a drill. Please evacuate immediately." Solomon appeared. The oldest lion in the zoo, once the pride of the African Ridge habitat, now stood outside his enclosure for the first time in nearly 3 decades. His massive body carried the weight of age. His mane, once deep gold, now streaked with silver and dull amber, his joints rigid, his breaths heavy and uneven. But even in his frailty, he held a presence that made the world around him shrink. He was not running. He was not roaring. He simply stood there, the mist curling around his paws, as if he had stepped out of another lifetime and into this one by deliberate choice. A woman pushing a stroller screamed and fled in the opposite direction, leaving the stroller behind. A man grabbed his partner's arm so hard she cried out, but he didn't let go. Everyone was running, yet Solomon did not chase. His head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as he drew in a long, trembling breath. His cloudy eyes scanned the distance, not with the focus of a hunter, but with the searching, uncertain gaze of someone listening for something familiar. Harry Dalton, the head of zoo security, sprinted into the plaza with 2 officers behind him. His boots slammed against the concrete, breath cutting sharp through the cold air. "Clear the area!" he shouted, waving people toward the emergency exits. "Move! Move! Move!" But even as he raised his tranquilizer rifle, Solomon didn't look at him. He didn't look at any of them. He stepped forward once, slowly, the way an old man rises from a chair. Careful, measured, fighting stiffness with every movement. The ground seemed to tremble beneath his weight, though it might have only been the tremor running through everyone's bodies as fear tightened its grip. The radios on the officers' belts erupted with voices. "Lion confirmed outside containment. Lock down the east gate. We need all handlers to Sector 3. Repeat, Code Red, Lion is mobile." But to the people in the plaza, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the giant, aging lion walking through the mist, his gaze fixed on a point far beyond the chaos, far beyond the screaming, far beyond what anyone could see. Solomon's tail hung low, swinging once before falling still. He took another step. If anyone had been close enough, they might have noticed the faint tremble in his legs, the way his breaths shuddered like they carried more than air, like they carried memory. But no one dared come close. They stood frozen behind benches and trash cans, behind other bodies, behind anything they could put between themselves and him. Harry steadied the rifle against his shoulder. His jaw tightened. His voice shook. "I need a clean shot." But Solomon didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the weapon pointed at him. He simply kept walking, pushing aside the mist with the quiet determination of someone who had waited a lifetime to take these steps. In that moment, it didn't matter that he was a lion. It didn't matter that he had escaped or that the zoo was in chaos. What mattered was that someone, was pulling him forward. Something only he could sense. And as he continued down the path, ignoring the fear, the shouts, the commands, and even the rifle aimed straight at him, the world around him held its breath, waiting to see where an old lion would go, and why he had chosen today to break free. The mist curled around Solomon's legs as he walked, the soft whisper of his paws brushing against the concrete, the only calm sound in a storm of panic. His steps were uneven, his hind leg dragging slightly, but his focus never wavered. He moved as if the chaos around him were nothing more than distant echoes of another world. Behind him, the plaza erupted even louder. Radio static, children crying, footsteps slapping against wet pavement, metal gates being slammed shut. "Sector North, lock it down!" someone yelled over the intercom. Another voice barked, "Cut off access to the aviary! Keep visitors moving!" The commands overlapped and tripped over each other, tangled in fear and adrenaline. But none of it reached Solomon. He kept walking, slow but sure, towards something unseen. Harry Dalton ran to catch up from the west corridor, boots pounding hard enough to shake the loose gravel underfoot. Sweat rolled down his temples, though the morning was still cold. He had seen animals break containment before. Antelope, zebra, once even a frantic kangaroo, but never Solomon. Never the lion who had grown old within the walls of this zoo, the same lion who barely rose from his resting platform anymore. Something about Solomon being free felt wrong, felt heavy, felt like it carried far more weight than just a loose animal. Harry raised the tranquilizer rifle again, his breath sharp and uneven. "Everyone clear the walkway! Move them back!" he shouted, waving frantically at the last of the stragglers. One toddler was crying uncontrollably, clinging to his mother's jacket. A teenager tripped over a bench, sending a ripple of panic through the group behind him. A woman screamed when she saw Solomon's silhouette growing larger through the thinning mist. "Harry, north exit's jammed," a guard called out, voice booming across the plaza. "People are piling up. Someone's going to get hurt." "Then clear it manually," Harry snapped back. "We need that path open." The guard nodded and sprinted away, vanishing into the fog. Near the lion habitat's outer fence, Megan Chu stood frozen beside a utility cart, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the metal edge to stay upright. She was only 4 days into her internship at the zoo, still learning protocols, still figuring out the rhythm of the job. That morning, she had walked the entire perimeter of the African Ridge habitat, checked latches, cleaned the side panels, verified the interior locks. She had believed everything was secure. She had believed she'd done her job. But now the door was open. Her heart pounded so violently, it felt like it was rattling her ribs from the inside. She pressed both hands to her cheeks, trying to stop their trembling. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, I messed up! I messed up!" She scanned the walkway, eyes stinging with tears. Every scream, every footstep, every alarm stabbed into her conscience like a blade. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Solomon did not so much as look her way. He passed the northern end of the habitat fencing, moving toward the main crossroads of the zoo, the broad open plaza where paths branched toward the aviary, the reptile house, and the woodland trail. His pace was deliberate but unsteady, his tail dragging low. His breath came out in slow, shaking motions, like each inhale carried a lifetime of weight. Harry caught sight of Megan through the fog and barked, "Megan, get to shelter! Go, now!" She flinched, but her feet wouldn't move. She could only stare at Solomon's massive form moving farther down the path. In his old age, he looked somehow more vulnerable than terrifying, as though the world had finally caught up to him and pressed its years into his bones. Solomon paused briefly at the fork. His cloudy golden eyes lifted, not toward the buildings or the fleeing crowds, but toward the northern entrance of the zoo, toward a direction no one else seemed to notice. His nostrils flared. His tail flicked once. Then he began walking again, heading straight for the one place no one expected. Harry noticed the shift instantly. "Why is he heading north?" he muttered under his breath. "That's toward the public gardens. There's nothing for him there." He adjusted his rifle and signaled to his team. "Stay parallel to him. Don't run. Don't provoke. Wait for a window. We need a clean shot." But the lion offered no such window. He did not behave like an animal in panic. He did not dart from noise or chase movement. He simply kept walking in that same slow, determined way. An old king following a path only he understood. Behind the aviary, a group of senior visitors stumbled through the fog, their faces pale with fear. One woman clutched a cane, trying to support her husband as he limped hurriedly away from the danger. A staff member guided them behind a utility gate. "Please, stay behind here," he instructed gently. "We'll keep you safe." But safety felt like a fragile promise in that moment. At the far edge of the plaza, a teenage boy climbed a low wall to get a better look at Solomon. His friend hissed, "Dude, get down! Are you crazy?" But the boy didn't move. He stared at Solomon, mesmerized by the surreal image, a massive, aging lion walking through the zoo like he belonged anywhere but behind a fence. The boy whispered, "He doesn't look angry. He looks sad." A strange hush fell over the onlookers who had paused at a safe distance. Even the running slowed as people turned to witness the impossible. An old lion, free and unhurried, moving through the heart of Portland Evergreen Zoo like he was searching for someone only he remembered. "Harry!" Another guard called out breathlessly as he jogged up beside him. "I radioed the horticulture team. They're evacuating the North Gardens now, and the reptile staff are locked down. What's your move?" "My move?" Harry said, eyes fixed on Solomon. His voice softened, tensing with confusion and frustration. "I don't even know what I'm looking at. This isn't normal behavior. He's not in attack mode. He's not even curious. He's focused." The guard frowned. "On what?" Harry exhaled slowly. "I wish I knew." Solomon reached the center of the crossroads, where the pavement widened into a circular courtyard lined with benches and flower beds. Only a few moments earlier, this space had been filled with laughter, stroller wheels, and the clinking of water bottles. Now it stood almost empty, the last echoes of panic fading down the distant paths. For the first time, Solomon stopped. He lifted his head, breathing deeply, tasting the air. Something in his old gaze changed, a flicker of recognition, a spark of memory. The tremble in his legs steadied just enough for him to raise his chin higher, as if trying to catch the scent again. Harry's heart thudded hard against his ribs. If he bolts north, he'll reach the main entrance, he muttered. We can't let that happen. But Solomon didn't bolt. He stepped forward, one slow, deliberate stride, as though every ounce of his being was pulling him towards something waiting beyond the fog. Somewhere far ahead, an elderly woman stood unknowingly in his path, and the world, shaken and breathless, braced for whatever would come next. The fog had thinned just enough for sunlight to slip in, casting a pale glow across the northern courtyard of Portland Evergreen Zoo. The last of the escaping visitors spilled out of the garden gate, but one figure remained in the widening quiet, still, fragile, and completely unaware of the storm that was about to converge on her. Eleanor Brooks stood near a bench beneath a leafless maple tree, her hand resting lightly on the top of her cane. She had paused only for a moment to catch her breath, thinking she would continue toward the exit once her knees stopped shaking from the morning chill. But something in the air made her freeze. A stirring, a shift, a faint tension she felt before she even understood it. She lifted her gaze slowly, her vision softening around the edges from age and the brightness of the rising sun. Then she saw movement through the mist, broad, slow, unmistakably purposeful. Her fingers tightened around the cane. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. Shadows often morphed in the fog, turning into shapes that weren't truly there. But as the shape grew larger, her heart dropped, heavy and trembling. She took one halting step backward, the rubber tip of her cane scraping the concrete. The mist parted just enough for her to see the outline of a mane, dull and tangled with age, a heavy body, the measured stride of a creature that had known strength once, long ago. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered softly. "No, not today." Behind her, two zoo staff members were herding the last remaining guests toward the emergency shelter. One noticed Eleanor and sprinted over, waving frantically. "Ma'am, you need to move, now!" His voice quivered with urgency as he reached her side, trying to guide her away by the elbow, but Eleanor didn't budge. Her eyes were locked on the figure moving out of the mist, her expression shifting from fear to disbelief, and then to something deeper, older, almost haunting. "Please," the staff member insisted. "There's a lion loose. You can't stay here." His words barely registered. Eleanor's throat tightened as she breathed in the cold air, her pulse echoing in her ears. She knew lions. She had seen many in her lifetime. But this one moved like a memory, trying to rise from the shadows of a life long buried. Solomon's massive form emerged fully from the mist, the sun catching the silver streaks in his mane. His paws pressed heavily against the pavement, each step trembling slightly from age and weight. The deep scar above his right eye pulled faintly as he lifted his head to look around. Then his eyes found Eleanor. Something in him stopped, his ribs pausing midway through a breath, his step faltering, his tail falling utterly still. Harry Dalton, still 20 yards behind with his tranquilizer rifle raised, saw it unfold in stunned disbelief. "Why's he stopping?" he muttered, but even he could feel the air shift. Eleanor lifted a hand to her chest. Her voice broke as she whispered to no one, "It can't be you." Solomon took another step, slow and heavy, his gaze fixed on the woman who hadn't run. The woman who couldn't run. The woman who stood there like a solitary pillar in the middle of the chaos. The tightening in her throat turned into a tremor that shook her entire body. Her mind raced backward through decades she had tried to leave behind. Nights by a lantern, soft fur pressed against her sweater, a tiny heartbeat she used to soothe with her own hands. The staff member tugged at her arm again. "Ma'am, please, he's getting closer." She didn't hear him. She didn't hear anything except the quiet, steady steps of the old lion making his way toward her, moving with the kind of heartbreaking recognition no one else could possibly understand. Solomon's movements grew more deliberate, almost fragile as he approached. His ears weren't pinned back. His teeth weren't bared. His body wasn't coiled to strike. Instead, he looked like a creature remembering something he lost, something he had spent years trying to hold on to as everything else in his life faded. Harry shouted from behind, "Ma'am, you have to step back. Step behind the benches, now!" Eleanor remained rooted to the spot. Her breathing quickened, tears rising unbidden. "Sonny?" she said, barely audible. "Is that you?" The name drifted across the courtyard like a thread of sound carried on the wind. And Solomon reacted. His ears flicked. His eyes widened. Not with aggression, but with something unbelievably tender. He inhaled sharply, tilting his head in a motion that sent a murmur through the thinning crowd. He took one more step toward her, slower this time, like the weight of the moment pressed against his aching bones. Megan Chu, still trembling near the horticulture gate, covered her mouth with both hands as she watched. "Why is he walking like that?" she whispered. "He's not hunting. He's going to her." The staff member beside Eleanor finally stepped back, fear overriding his attempt to protect her. "Ma'am, I can't stay out here with you. Please, please." But Eleanor wasn't listening. Her knees trembled as Solomon drew closer, his breath visible in the cool morning air. The fog swirled behind him, curling around his legs like a ghostly trail. His gaze never left her. Even the tremors running through his aging body seemed to settle as he approached the one person who hadn't run from him. Harry's voice cracked as he shouted, "Do not approach the lion! Stay back! Stay back!" But Eleanor stepped forward. Just one step, small and shaky, as her cane slipped slightly in her grasp. Her breath hitched. Her eyes filled with a desperate, aching hope that made her chest rise and fall unevenly. She wasn't sure. She couldn't be sure. But in that moment, something in her spirit pulled her toward the old lion, the same way something in him pulled him toward her. Solomon slowed even more, almost lowering himself as he neared her. His tail brushed the ground. His whiskers quivered. His eyes softened into a look no one on the security team had ever seen on a wild animal, especially not one that had just escaped. The courtyard grew silent. The alarm still blared somewhere in the distance, but here in this fragile square of space between an old lion and an elderly woman, time seemed to stretch thin and quiet. Even the wind felt still. Solomon stopped less than 10 feet from Eleanor. A sound escaped him. A low, trembling rumble. Not a growl, not a warning, but something closer to a plea. The kind of sound a creature makes when it has found what it has been searching for but cannot yet understand if it is truly real. Eleanor wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her shaking hand. "Oh, dear boy," she whispered, voice cracking. "It really is you, isn't it?" Solomon answered with a slow blink, the silent language of trust. And for the first time that morning, the fear in the air faltered, giving way to a strange, fragile hope that no one could explain. The courtyard, moments ago filled with running feet and desperate shouts, now seemed suspended in a quiet that didn't belong to an emergency at all. It was a quiet made of breath held too long, of hearts beating too hard, of something about to surface that no one could yet understand. Eleanor's hand trembled against the handle of her cane. Her vision blurred slightly from the tears gathering in her eyes, but she blinked them away just enough to see him clearly. The lion with the familiar tilt of the head, the familiar droop of the ear, the familiar way he held his weight on his left side. Her throat constricted with something sharp and aching. She had not seen these movements in nearly 3 decades, yet they returned to her with the clarity of yesterday. Solomon took another step forward, the weight of his body shifting with the careful deliberation of an animal who knew his own strength but chose not to use it. His paws touched the ground in slow, steady beats, almost hesitant. He lowered his massive head, nostrils flaring as if tasting the air around her, searching for a scent he once knew by heart. The fog drifted lazily around him, brushing against his mane like a worn memory coming back to life. Harry Dalton took 2 steps closer, rifle raised, his voice cracking through the fragile calm. "Ma'am, don't move. Please, just stay right where you are." His breath shook, not from fear of Solomon, but fear of what might happen if anything at all, startled the aging lion. But Eleanor didn't seem to hear him. Her gaze stayed fixed on Solomon, her eyes wide with disbelief and something deeper, something that frightened her more than the lion himself. "Sonny," she murmured, barely audible. "My little boy, how can this be?" The name drifted across the courtyard, soft and trembling. Solomon's ears lifted, a faint twitch at the sound, as though the single word traveled through him like a spark. He paused mid-step, his chest rising with a deep, uneven breath. His tail swept gently against the ground, not with agitation, but with recognition that bordered on wonder. Megan Chu stood several yards behind Eleanor, hands clasped over her mouth as she watched. Her eyes widened. "He reacted to her," she whispered through her fingers. "Oh God, he really reacted." She looked around at the other staff, searching for confirmation, but everyone else seemed equally stunned. Harry lowered his rifle an inch, confusion knitting his brow. Why is he acting like that? Lions don't respond to people like this. His voice trailed off, lost in the strangeness of the moment. From the south side of the courtyard, a family huddled behind a bench, peeking over its wooden edge. The father, who had been shielding his daughter moments ago, whispered, "He's not going after her. He's being gentle." His daughter clutched his sleeve, eyes enormous and shining with awe. Solomon moved closer still. He lifted his head just enough to truly see her. Eleanor, the frail woman standing before him, with her silver hair gently stirring in the breeze. The years had changed her, thinned her, softened her, but something about her presence pierced through the haze of his age. Something he recognized, something he remembered even after decades of confinement and silence. And Eleanor felt it too. Her pulse fluttered wildly beneath her skin. She took one shaky breath and whispered, "It can't be real." She pressed a trembling hand to her heart. It can't." Her voice broke, and Solomon responded with a low, breathy rumble. Not a growl, not even close, but a soft, wavering sound that stopped the courtyard cold. It was the kind of sound a lion makes when greeting a familiar presence, an instinctive noise born from trust, not instinct. The sound pulsed through the open space, carrying a strange warmth that softened even the edges of the emergency alarms echoing in the distance. Zoe Mitchell, the zoo veterinarian, arrived from the west path, jogging until she saw Solomon's posture. Then she stopped dead in her tracks. "What on earth?" she whispered. She had known Solomon for years, had treated him countless times, but she had never once seen him like this. Never seen his body relax, his eyes soften, his tail lower in careful ease. Eleanor took a small, trembling step forward. The cane clicked against the pavement. A collective gasp swept through the courtyard. Harry hissed urgently, "Ma'am, stop, please, don't get any closer." But she couldn't help herself. The moment she saw the scar just above Solomon's eye, a familiar crescent-shaped mark barely visible under the faded fur. Her knees nearly buckled. She clutched her cane tighter. "That scar," she whispered. "Oh, dear Lord." Solomon paused as though hearing the tremor in her voice, as though feeling her recognition in the air. He glanced at her cane, then back at her face, and took one more deliberate step, lowering his head further. His breath escaped in soft huffs, misting the space between them. Megan covered her mouth once more, tears springing from the corners of her eyes. "He knows her," she whispered. "He actually knows her." Harry stared, speechless, his rifle forgotten in his hands. Solomon blinked slowly again, the gesture almost tender. He leaned ever so slightly toward her, the tremble in his legs barely visible now. The wind carried Eleanor's scent toward him, faint, older, weathered by time, but unmistakably hers. Eleanor's lips parted as her heart cracked open with a familiar ache. "Sonny," she breathed, voice trembling. "It's really you, isn't it?" For a moment, everything in the world seemed to still. Even the birds perched on the nearby branches remained frozen, as though the earth itself had paused to witness the impossible reunion unfolding between a woman and the lion she had not seen in 30 years. Solomon let out a soft chuff, the sound of trust, the sound of longing, the sound of memory breaking through the fog of age. And in that fragile moment, Eleanor felt her years melt away, leaving only the echo of a younger woman holding a trembling lion cub against her chest under the glow of a lantern. The past had walked out of the mist to meet her, step by slow step, across 3 long decades. A breeze drifted through the courtyard, brushing against Eleanor's coat, tugging gently at the thin strands of her hair. It carried the faint scent of cedar, damp earth, and something else, something older, something impossibly familiar. Solomon lifted his head slightly as the wind rolled across him, nostrils flaring as though he were tasting the memory again, tasting her. His tail swept the ground once, an unsteady motion that left a streak through the wet leaves. Harry Dalton steadied his rifle, though his hands shook so hard he could barely keep the barrel level. "Why is he doing that?" he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "Why is he acting like he knows her?" The question hung unanswered in the thinning fog. Even the alarms echoing faintly from the emergency system seemed to soften, giving space to the strange quiet taking hold. Near the control building, inside a cramped room lined with flickering screens, 2 technicians worked frantically to rewind surveillance footage. Their fingers flew across keyboards, pulling up the morning's recordings from the African Ridge habitat. The grainy video showed Solomon pacing near the back corner of his enclosure at precisely 8:39 a.m., ears twitching, tail flicking erratically. He kept lifting his head toward the northern wall, as though sensing something far beyond the fence. Dr. Zoe Mitchell leaned over the monitors, brow furrowed. "Look at his posture," she whispered. "He's not stressed. He's alert, focused, like he's picking up something none of us can." The technician rewound the footage again. The moment the wind shifted, blowing from the north gate toward the habitat, Solomon froze. His head snapped upward. His entire body hardened in attention. His mouth opened slightly, long whiskers trembling. "That's deep scent memory," Zoe said softly. Something powerful hit him, something old. In the courtyard, Megan Chu stood trembling as she watched the lion and the elderly woman facing each other in a silence heavy with meaning she couldn't grasp. Tears clung to her lashes as she pressed her hands together. "I didn't close the latch right," she whispered to no one. "I caused this." Her guilt twisted inside her so sharply she felt sick, but even in her panic, she couldn't ignore what was unfolding before her eyes. Solomon took another step forward, slow and deliberate, as though making sure Eleanor wouldn't be startled. His mane fluttered lightly in the breeze. His breath came in soft, shaky bursts, far too vulnerable a sound for a creature that once commanded crowds just by standing on his platform. Eleanor lifted her shaking hand and let it hover in the air, inches from his face. Her fingers trembled so violently she had to steady her wrist with her other hand. "You smell the same," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Even after all these years, you still know me." Solomon leaned forward, just enough for the tip of his nose to brush her hand. The moment his whiskers grazed her skin, a fragile gasp rippled through the courtyard. A father clasped his child's shoulder. A young couple held hands tightly, unable to look away. Even Harry felt his chest tighten, a lump rising in his throat he didn't want to acknowledge. He lowered the rifle another inch. Solomon breathed her in slowly, reverently, and Eleanor closed her eyes. The wind picked up again, swirling around them, brushing away the fog that clung to the ground. With it, a memory stirred, so vividly, so painfully, that she felt as though she had been pulled backward in time. She saw herself younger, stronger, holding a frail cub wrapped in a flannel blanket. She remembered feeding him from a bottle under the dim glow of a lantern. She remembered humming old lullabies to calm him during storms. She remembered the way he curled up beneath her chin, his tiny body trembling until her voice soothed him into sleep. "Sonny," she whispered, her voice cracking on the name. "My sweet boy." Solomon let out a deeper rumble than before, head lowering even more. The sound vibrated through the ground, through Eleanor's feet, through the hearts of every onlooker glued to the moment. It was not the sound of a predator. It was the sound of longing, of recognition, of something that had survived time, separation, and a lifetime lived apart. Inside the control room, Zoe watched the footage closely as the technician replayed it a third time. "He didn't escape out of confusion," she murmured. "He pushed at the gate only after the scent hit him. It's not a coincidence." She swallowed hard, unable to take her eyes off the screen. He was going to her. Back in the courtyard, Megan's voice trembled. "He wasn't trying to get out," she whispered. "He was trying to find her." Harry finally lowered the tranquilizer rifle completely, letting the barrel drop toward the ground. The decision wasn't rational. It wasn't protocol. But it was human. "Nobody move," he said quietly. "Nobody gets between them." Solomon blinked slowly again, his breath warming the back of Eleanor's hand. She felt the years collapse around her, the loneliness that had followed her after her husband died, the guilt she had carried for failing to visit the sanctuary where Sonny had been taken, the fear that he had forgotten her entirely. But he had not forgotten, not remotely. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You waited," she whispered. "All this time. You kept me with you." She rested her trembling hand against the side of his weathered face. His eyes softened further, as though the simple touch eased something heavy inside him, something that had weighed on him for a lifetime. He remembered her scent. He remembered her voice. He remembered the warmth of the woman who once held him through winter storms. The wind had carried her back to him, and with a full-bodied sigh that shook through his old bones, Solomon pressed gently into her palm, choosing her as the one safe place he had ever known. In the midst of alarms, fear, and chaos, the truth settled over the courtyard like a quiet revelation. He had not escaped. He had come home. For several long seconds, no one moved. The entire zoo seemed to fall under the spell of the impossible bond unfolding between the frail woman and the aging lion. Even the breeze felt lighter, drifting softly through the thinning fog, as if reluctant to disturb the fragile moment. Solomon's head remained lowered, pressed gently against Eleanor's trembling palm. His breath came in warm, uneven huffs, stirring the loose strands of her hair. His body, though massive and worn, seemed almost small in the stillness, as though the years had carved out vulnerability where fear once lived. Harry Dalton watched with stunned disbelief, the tranquilizer rifle resting uselessly in his hands. The man had spent 2 decades studying animal behavior, memorizing every danger protocol written for big cats, but nothing in any manual prepared him for what he was seeing. "This isn't normal," he muttered under his breath. "This goes against everything we know." Nearby, Megan Chu clutched the railing, her face pale and streaked with tears she could no longer fight. "I caused this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't lock the gate right." The weight of her guilt pressed down on her shoulders, but even she couldn't look away from the lion leaning into Eleanor's hand as tenderly as an animal could. Eleanor swallowed, her throat tightening as memories she had buried for decades came rushing back. Her knees buckled slightly. Solomon noticed the shift and stepped forward again, lowering himself as though trying to steady her with his presence. His soft rumble vibrated the air between them, a sound of reassurance, almost protective in its gentleness. A wave of emotion washed over Eleanor so intensely she had to grip her cane to keep from collapsing. "My boy," she whispered, "I thought I lost you forever." Solomon answered with another soft chuff, the sound pushing a new tear down her cheek. She wiped it away slowly, her fingers shaking. "I never forgot you," she said. "Not a single day." The breeze shifted again, carrying with it a faint echo of another time, a memory wrapped in winter wind, lantern light, and the soft weight of a small lion cub curled against her chest beneath a flannel blanket. And suddenly, in a quiet ripple of recognition that spread across her heart like an old wound reopening, she felt herself pulled back 30 years. It had been a bitter winter in Kansas, the kind that froze pipes and sent the smell of chimney smoke drifting across every neighborhood. She had been working nights at the Wildlife Rescue Center then, tending to orphaned or injured animals left in the wake of a violent storm. She remembered the morning the ranger arrived with a battered crate in the back of his truck, snow clinging to his boots as he carried it inside. Inside the crate lay a tiny lion cub, his fur damp, his ribs showing, his breaths thin and shaky. His eyes, barely open, flickered with confusion and fear. "We found him beside his mother," the ranger had said grimly. "She didn't make it." Eleanor knelt beside the crate, her heart crumpling at the sight. "Poor little thing," she whispered, reaching out gently. The cub let out a faint cry, a sound so fragile it pierced something deep inside her. She lifted him into her arms, cradling him against her chest. He was cold, trembling, desperate for warmth. She wrapped him in a flannel towel and held him close. "You're safe," she murmured, rocking him gently as though he were a child. "I've got you now." She stayed with him through the night, feeding him warm formula every 2 hours, rubbing his tiny belly to help him swallow, humming lullabies she hadn't thought about since her husband's illness began. He nestled beneath her chin, his breathing eventually slowing as he drifted into an exhausted sleep. By dawn, he had stopped shaking. The days turned into weeks. The cub grew stronger, bolder. Eleanor named him Sunny because he brought warmth back into her life in a time when everything else felt cold. He followed her every step at the rescue center, nudging her hands when he wanted attention, curling up at her side during her breaks. She wrote notes about his progress in a worn notebook, notes that later helped young interns understand early life trauma in wildlife. Sunny became her purpose, her comfort, her companion. But spring brought hardship. Her husband's health deteriorated rapidly. Bills piled up. Work became a struggle. Then one morning, a letter arrived. The Wildlife Center was being shut down due to funding cuts. The animals would be transported to different facilities across the country. Eleanor fought to keep Sunny. She wrote letters, signed petitions, even tried to contact sanctuaries herself. But the law could not be bent, no matter how much love stood in the way. He was growing. Too large, too wild, too strong for her frail hands to hold on to forever. The day they took him away, he cried, a high, shaking sound she had never heard from him before. He clawed at the crate door, desperate to get back to her, desperate not to be alone again. She leaned in close, pressing her fingers through the bars as tears blurred her vision. "I'll find you," she promised. "I'll come see you. I won't let you grow up alone." But life, heavy and unkind, tore that promise from her grasp. Her husband needed full-time care. Her heart condition worsened. The years rolled by faster than she ever expected, and she never found him. Not until now. Back in the courtyard, Eleanor felt her chest tighten as she stared into Solomon's eyes she once looked into every night by lantern glow. "Sonny," she breathed, her voice thick with sorrow and awe. "It is you." Solomon blinked slowly again, recognition shimmering in the golden haze of his gaze. Harry swallowed hard. What did she call him?" Megan's voice cracked. "Sonny. His name used to be Sonny." Zoe finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He remembers her. After all these years, he remembers." The world around them blurred at the edges, the chaos fading into a distant hum. All that remained clear was a woman reunited with the creature she had once saved. A creature who had spent a lifetime searching for the scent of the only home he had ever known. Solomon lowered his head again, nudging gently against Eleanor's hand. His breath trembled, warm and familiar, carrying with it the unmistakable truth of a bond that had survived decades of distance. In that moment, surrounded by fear, alarms, and disbelief, the past stepped fully into the present. The lion had come home not by accident, but by memory, by devotion, by love that had never faded. Eleanor steadied herself against her cane, though her body felt too light, too weak, as if the years themselves were slipping from her grasp. Solomon remained close, lowering his immense head to stay level with her trembling frame. The courtyard around them seemed to inhale and hold the breath of every witness. People who moments ago were running for their lives now watched in stunned silence, unsure if they were seeing a miracle or the unraveling of something far more fragile. Solomon's body softened as he stepped closer. His old joints shifted with the stiff, deliberate care of a creature who understood his own strength and was fighting every instinct to avoid frightening the person before him. Age had thinned the muscles along his flanks, and the once majestic mane now hung uneven and faded, but the power of his presence still radiated through the cold morning air. Eleanor lifted her hand again, barely able to keep it from shaking. "Sonny," she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a prayer she never thought she would utter again. Solomon's ears twitched at the sound. Then he made that trembling rumble again, pressing his head toward her chest. Tentative, yearning, almost asking permission. Harry Dalton, standing a dozen yards away, watched the exchange with his mouth slightly open. He had seen lions bow their heads in submission, in fatigue, in dominance displays, but never like this. Never toward a human being. Never toward an elderly woman who, by all logic, should have been frozen in terror. "Keep the perimeter tight," Harry murmured to the guards beside him, though his voice held none of the command it usually carried. "No sudden movements, no loud noise, just hold position." One guard whispered, "Sir, are we letting this happen?" Harry swallowed hard. "For now, yes." Eleanor took a step toward Solomon. A single step, small, uneven, but brave enough to stir a murmur among the staff. Her cane tapped the concrete, wobbling slightly, and she nearly lost her balance. Solomon reacted instantly, shifting his weight forward, lowering himself instinctively as if trying to become a support rather than a threat. It was the kind of movement no amount of training could force from a lion. It came only from understanding, from recognition. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision again. "You're older," she said softly, her voice cracking. "So much older than the little cub I held. But I see you. I know you." Solomon blinked slowly, another silent signal of trust. From across the courtyard, Megan Chu's breath hitched in her throat. She clung to the metal railing, her face streaked with tears she couldn't stop. "He knows her," she whispered. "He really knows her." Zoe arrived beside Harry, chest still heaving from running across the zoo grounds. She stopped dead when she saw the scene before her. "My God," she breathed. "This isn't just recognition. This is emotional recall." Harry frowned. "You mean like elephants?" Zoe nodded weakly. "Yes, and certain primates. But lions aren't supposed to do this." Her voice faltered, swallowed by the reverence settling over the courtyard. "This goes beyond anything I've ever seen." Solomon stepped closer still, until there were barely 3 feet separating him from Eleanor. His breath warmed the air between them. The fog, now pulling away from the paths, created a halo-like glow around the 2 figures, an aging lion and a frail woman standing face to face as though drawn together by fate itself. Eleanor reached forward with trembling fingers and touched Solomon's mane. The courtyard fell completely silent. The lion closed his eyes, leaning into the touch with a gentleness no one present had ever seen from him. Not during feeding, not during medical sedation, not even during the quietest moments of his old age. His massive body relaxed, shoulders dipping slightly, breath coming in a soft, almost relieved sigh. Eleanor brushed her fingers down the side of his face, over the faded scar near his eye. "You were always such a brave boy," she murmured, her voice steadying as though the act of touching him restored something deep within her. "I never stopped loving you, not for one day." At her words, Solomon let out a low sound, deep, trembling, heartbreakingly tender. The kind of sound that made the air feel heavy with emotion. A sound that didn't belong in any safety protocol, didn't exist in any care manual, didn't fit into any explanation the staff could offer. People cried openly now. Even those hiding behind benches or fences felt the shift. The raw, undeniable emotion emanating from a creature assumed incapable of such depth. It was as though the courtyard itself understood the reunion and mourned the years lost between them. Then, suddenly, Solomon's legs shook. Just for a moment. A wobble, a soft stumble. Eleanor gasped and reached toward him instinctively. Solomon lowered himself slightly, a protective motion that startled Harry. "What's happening?" Harry asked sharply. Zoe studied the lion's posture, her brow furrowing with concern. "He's tired," she murmured. "Too tired. That walk, forcing the gait. He's older than we think. Much older." Eleanor's hand rested against the curve of Solomon's cheek. "You poor thing," she whispered. "You must have been so scared. All alone." Solomon pressed his forehead gently into her hand, as though her touch eased something heavy inside him. Zoe took a cautious step forward. "We need to get him inside," she said softly. "He shouldn't be out here like this. Not in his condition." Harry nodded. "Not without her," he muttered. Zoe glanced at him in surprise, but Harry wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Solomon, on the way the lion's entire body shifted to follow Eleanor's movements, on the way his tail lay flat with calm rather than fear, on the way he seemed to draw strength from the woman he had crossed the zoo to find. "He's not going anywhere without her," Harry said quietly. "If we separate them right now, it'll break him." Eleanor looked up, her eyes softening with something deeper than surprise, something closer to acceptance. "He found me," she said in a whisper that carried across the courtyard. After all these years, he still found me. Solomon nudged her gently again, urging her closer, urging her not to step away. For a long, trembling moment, they stayed like that, lion and woman, breathing the same cold morning air, wrapped in a reunion no one had seen coming. And in the quiet that followed, the truth settled across every heart watching. This was no accident, no coincidence, no random behavior. This was destiny rediscovered. This was love returned. This was a bond that time had failed to erase. And as the alarms finally fell silent in the distance, Solomon lifted his head, exhaled a deep, weary breath, and leaned his entire weight, trustingly, completely, against the woman who had once saved his life. He had crossed the zoo for her. He had broken free for her. And now he had found her. The courtyard held its breath as the aging lion leaned his full, weary weight against the woman who had once been his entire world. For a moment, the fear that had gripped every heart since the code-red announcement melted into something gentler, something that trembled at the edge of disbelief. Solomon's mane brushed softly against Eleanor's coat, and she steadied herself as best she could, her free hand hovering awkwardly before she finally rested it against his cheek. Her fingers sank into the coarse, time-worn fur that had once been soft as flannel. Solomon's eyes fluttered shut, the tension in his shoulders easing as he leaned closer. A sound, low, breathy, tender, escaped him, and the courtyard fell even quieter. It was not a threat. It was not dominance. It was the sound of a tired heart recognizing the one familiar thing left in the world. Eleanor's own breath trembled. "My sweet boy," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the moment. "I can't believe it's really you." Solomon's tail lay motionless against the pavement, his ears tilted forward as if soaking in every syllable she uttered. For a creature whose life had been defined by instinct, he now seemed held together only by memory. Memory of a woman who smelled of cotton and winter nights, who hummed softly when he was frightened, who held him through the darkest storms of his early life. Harry Dalton slowly lowered the tranquilizer rifle all the way, letting it hang at his side. His breath came heavier than before, sweat cooling against his forehead. "This is impossible," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Lions don't behave like this. Not ever." Zoe stepped beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. Instinct shouldn't remember her, but emotion might. She stared at the pair in awe, her professional training colliding with the undeniable scene before her. "He's not acting like a wild animal. He's acting like—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Like he's home," Harry said softly. Across the courtyard, a few guests had stopped mid-evacuation, their fear overtaken by astonishment. A young mother held her toddler tightly, tears streaking her cheeks. A man removed his baseball cap, holding it over his chest. Even Megan Chu, still trembling from guilt, couldn't tear her eyes away. Solomon shifted his weight, attempting to move closer still. The motion caused a slight stumble, his back leg wobbling before he steadied himself again. Eleanor gasped, instinctively reaching out to catch him. Forgetting entirely that she was the fragile one, Solomon lowered himself further, almost bowing, as though trying to reassure her that he meant no harm. The guards tensed, unsure if this change in posture signaled danger, but Harry lifted a hand sharply. "Don't," he whispered. Let him be." Eleanor took a shaky step forward, closing the last inches between them. She slipped her frail hand beneath his chin and gently stroked the fur there, the way she used to when he was a cub crying in the night. Solomon's breath quivered. He lowered his massive head again until his nose brushed the sleeve of her coat. A collective gasp rippled through the courtyard. It was the forbidden, the unthinkable, the touch of a lion against a human. Not in danger, not in fear, but in affection. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that spilled freely down her lined cheeks. "I'm so sorry I didn't come for you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Life got so hard. I never stopped loving you." Solomon brushed his nose gently against her shoulder. His breath warmed her chest. His body seemed to relax further, as if the exhaustion of decades had finally found a place to rest. Megan pressed a hand to her mouth. "Why does he look relieved?" she asked, voice trembling. "Like he was afraid she wouldn't be here." Zoe swallowed hard. "Because he didn't escape," she murmured. "He searched. He followed a memory so deep that even old age couldn't erase it." Harry stepped forward. "Eleanor," he said softly, "we need to move you both somewhere safe. Slowly. We have to get you indoors before the crowd gets worse." Eleanor nodded faintly, but didn't take her eyes off Solomon. "I'll go anywhere he goes," she said. "He came all this way to find me." Her voice, soft but unwavering, struck something in Harry's chest he didn't know he still carried. He exchanged a look with Zoe, who gave a small nod. "Okay," Harry said. "We do this on his terms." Eleanor extended her hand slowly, letting Solomon smell it once more. Then she turned slightly, taking a careful step backward. Solomon followed immediately, his stride slow, heavy, but purposeful, his body aligned with hers, as though he had spent a lifetime protecting her instead of being separated for most of it. The guards parted instinctively as the pair walked, unsure whether they were witnessing a miracle or a memory too powerful to deny. Some cried quietly, others simply stared. Solomon stayed close, brushing against Eleanor every few steps, as if afraid she might vanish should he lag behind. She reached up occasionally to touch his mane, each stroke as gentle as a farewell that had waited too long. When they reached the edge of the courtyard, Eleanor paused and looked into Solomon's eyes. "You found me," she whispered, voice trembling with awe and regret. "You found me when I had nothing left to give." Solomon blinked slowly, his breath warming the cold morning air. He nudged her hand with a tenderness that broke the heart of every witness. And as they stood together at the threshold of what came next, something unspoken flowed between them. A silent vow, rekindled after 30 long years. A vow stronger than fear, stronger than time, stronger than the walls that had kept them apart. For the first time since escaping his enclosure, Solomon truly rested. Not because he was safe, but because he was with her. Eleanor felt the weight of his head against her hand, a heaviness that spoke of years he had carried alone. His breathing, steady but strained, brushed warm against her fingers. She leaned slightly closer, letting her palm glide down the side of his face. His eyes fluttered closed in response, as if that simple touch soothed aches no medicine ever could. Harry Dalton stepped forward, speaking gently to avoid disrupting the fragile calm. "Eleanor, we need to get both of you somewhere quiet, somewhere safer than out here." His voice trembled a little, not from fear, but from the overwhelming tenderness of what he was witnessing. Eleanor nodded, though her gaze stayed locked on Solomon. "Yes," she whispered. "He shouldn't be standing this long." Zoe approached with cautious steps, keeping her hands visible and her posture low. "Eleanor," she said softly, "may I come closer? I need to look at him. Just look, not touch." She made sure Solomon saw her first. He lifted his head slightly, sniffing at the air, studying her with a tired but steady gaze. When he didn't react negatively, Zoe moved a little closer and crouched several feet away. Her trained eyes scanned the lion's body, taking in every sign she had feared she would see. His ribs moved unevenly with each breath. His joints swelled subtly beneath his fur. His mane, though full in shape, looked thin in texture. His once powerful shoulders sagged, the years etched deeply into them. Zoe's face fell. She knew the truth long before she said it out loud. Eleanor felt the shift in Zoe's expression like a cold wind. "Tell me," she said, tightening her grip on her cane, though she already sensed the answer. "Please, tell me." Zoe hesitated, swallowing hard. "He's old, Eleanor, much older than most lions ever lived to be." She took a slow breath. "And he's sick, very sick." The words landed like stones. Solomon's tail swept once across the ground, not in agitation, but in exhaustion. He shifted his stance, trying to stay upright, trying to stay close to the woman who had meant home to him in a world that had grown small and lonely. Zoe continued, her voice gentle but weighted. "His joints are almost locked from arthritis. That shaking in his legs, it's not just age. He's losing strength faster than we can help him." She paused. "And his breathing, that heaviness. Eleanor, I think his kidneys are failing." Eleanor's breath caught. A sharp ache tightened in her chest, not just emotional, but the familiar warning of her own aging heart. She steadied herself, blinking back the blur in her vision. "How long?" she asked quietly. Zoe looked at Solomon again, at the way he leaned against Eleanor not as a predator, but as a creature seeking comfort. "Weeks," she whispered. "Maybe months, but not long." The courtyard, already quiet, seemed to fall into a deeper stillness. Even the wind paused. Solomon lowered his head again and nudged Eleanor's hand gently, as though sensing the tension in her body. She stroked his cheek, her eyes brimming. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "You carried all of this alone, didn't you?" Megan Chu choked on a sob. Guilt poured down her face in tears. "If I hadn't messed up the latch, he wouldn't be suffering like this. He wouldn't be out here." Harry turned sharply. "Megan, stop." His voice was firm but not harsh. "This didn't happen because of you. Even if the gate had been locked, he would have tried all day, maybe all night. He wasn't escaping to run free. He was escaping to find her." Megan pressed her hands to her forehead, trembling. I didn't know something like this was even possible." No one did. Eleanor let her fingers trail gently through Solomon's mane. "You came all this way," she whispered, "because you remembered me." Solomon leaned closer, closing the remaining space between them, his massive head resting against her chest. Eleanor brought her other hand up, wrapping her fragile arms as far around him as she could. "You always were my brave boy." The moment might have lasted forever, two souls touching, comforting one another after 3 decades of separation, until a sudden tremor rippled through Solomon's frame. His back leg buckled, and he almost sank to the ground. Zoe and Harry stepped forward simultaneously, but Eleanor raised a trembling hand, stopping them. "It's all right," she said softly. "He just needs a moment." Solomon steadied himself with a deep, shuddering breath. His body shook again, just slightly, and Eleanor felt her heart squeeze painfully. This wasn't just exhaustion. It was the weight of an ending he could no longer hold back. She looked at Zoe. "He doesn't have much time left, does he?" Zoe exhaled slowly. "No." Eleanor nodded, tears slipping down her face without hesitation. "Neither do I." The guards and staff froze. The ripple of shock was palpable. Harry's head snapped toward her. "Eleanor, what are you saying?" She took a slow breath, her fingers tightening in Solomon's mane. "I'm dying too," she whispered. "Heart failure. End-of-life care." She tried to smile, but the sadness in her eyes softened it into something fragile and true. 3 months, maybe less. Zoe covered her mouth. Megan gasped. Even Harry's expression crumpled. Solomon pressed closer. a soft, mournful sound rising from deep in his chest, almost as if he understood. Eleanor smoothed the fur around his ears, her voice tender and resolute. Maybe he came to walk me home. A hush fell over the courtyard so profound it felt sacred. No one spoke, no one moved. The truth hung between them, raw, heavy, inevitable. Two old souls, nearing the end of their journeys, had found each other in the middle of chaos. Not by chance, not by mistake. By love, by memory, by the quiet pull of a promise long delayed. Eleanor lifted her face toward the sky, letting the cool morning air brush her cheeks. "I thought I would leave this world alone," she whispered. "But I'm not alone now, not anymore." Solomon leaned his head against her shoulder, his breath soft and warm. Harry lowered his eyes, blinking hard to keep them from stinging. "Zoe," he murmured, voice hushed. "What do we even do now?" Zoe swallowed. "We keep them together," she said softly, "for as long as life allows." And in that moment, the choice became clear, not just to the staff, but to everyone witnessing the reunion. They would not separate the woman and the lion again. Not now. Not at the end. The decision settled over the courtyard like a vow silently made by every soul present. No one said the words out loud. Not yet. But the weight of them hung in the air so clearly that even the wind seemed to pause in acknowledgement. Solomon pressed gently against Eleanor's side, his massive body trembling with fatigue, while Eleanor steadied herself with one hand buried in his mane. Harry Dalton exhaled slowly, lowering the tranquilizer rifle all the way until its tip rested against the pavement. He looked from Solomon to Eleanor, then to Dr. Zoe Mitchell standing beside him. Her eyes rimmed with tears she made no effort to hide. "Zoe," he murmured, "protocol says we separate them. Get Solomon sedated. Move him to isolation." "I know what protocol says," she replied softly, cutting him off. "But protocol wasn't written for moments like this." Her voice, usually steady and clinical, wavered with something deeper, something that recognized the fragile humanity standing between a dying woman and a dying lion. The connection that no rulebook could have anticipated. The bond no regulation could neatly fit into a category. "We can't tear them apart," Zoe finished, shaking her head. "Not today." The wind rustled the dry leaves near their feet as if agreeing. Harry glanced toward the cluster of staff and guests who had gathered at safe distances around the courtyard. Many of them had stopped crying, but raw emotions still clung to their faces like fresh paint. Megan Chu wiped her cheeks, her chest hitching with quick breaths. Two security guards stared at Solomon in awe, their stern expressions softened into something close to reverence. A father held his young daughter, who whispered, "They love each other," with innocent certainty. Eleanor stroked the top of Solomon's head, feeling the edges of his bones beneath her palm, feeling the tiredness in him that mirrored her own. "He came here for me," she whispered. "He shouldn't spend whatever time he has left locked in a room alone." Her voice was fragile, but it carried truth straight into every heart. Solomon leaned heavier into her, his chin brushing her shoulder. His whiskers tickled her neck, and she let out a breath somewhere between a sob and a relieved sigh. She held him the best she could, though her arms were small and frail against the mass of him. Harry cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. "We need to think this through," he said firmly. "This isn't just about companionship. This is liability. This is safety. This is compassion," Zoe interrupted quietly. "Compassion isn't always tidy, but sometimes it's the only right thing." Eleanor looked up at the two of them, her soft eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of exhaustion and peace. "If you take him away," she said gently, "you'll take away the only comfort he has left in this world. And the only comfort I have left too." The admission shattered whatever resistance Harry had left. He pressed a hand to his forehead, exhaling shakily. "All right," he murmured. "All right. But we have to move, both of you. The courtyard's not safe, and we still have panicked visitors." "I'll walk," Eleanor said softly. Solomon lifted his head at her tone. He adjusted his stance and shifted closer when she took her first step. His large body moved slowly, carefully, always just a breath behind her, as though guiding her forward while relying on her presence to hold himself up. Harry lifted his radio. "All units," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "We're leading the Lion and Miss Brooks to the veterinary center. Clear the route. No running. No sudden movements. Total silence." "Copy," voices crackled back. Zoe took position on Eleanor's other side, ready to intervene if her health faltered. She watched Solomon closely, noting the stiffness in his gait, the uneven rise and fall of his chest. "Take your time," she murmured. "We're in no rush." But as they walked, something remarkable happened. Solomon matched Eleanor's pace perfectly. When she slowed, he slowed. When she paused to take a breath, he lowered himself slightly, as if mirroring her struggle. When her cane wobbled on a crack in the pavement, he moved closer, offering the illusion of support even though she weighed barely a fraction of him. It was a walk no one who witnessed it would ever forget. The sight of an elderly woman and an old lion moving together, as though connected by a thread no time could sever. The route to the veterinary center took them past shuttered concession stands, empty picnic tables, and the peacock garden, where bright feathers peeked cautiously from behind bushes. Staff cleared the path in advance, stepping aside with quiet awe as Solomon approached. The usual sounds of the zoo, keeper chatter, animal calls, distant laughter, were replaced by a solemn hush. Halfway there, Eleanor's breath hitched. She pressed a hand to her chest, wincing. Zoe stepped in immediately. "We can stop," she said gently. "Let's rest a moment." Eleanor shook her head. "I'm all right," she insisted weakly. "I just need a second." Solomon stopped too. He turned his head and pressed his forehead softly against her upper arm, nuzzling her with the same comforting gesture he used as a cub whenever she was overwhelmed. Eleanor's eyes filled again, and she let out a trembling laugh. "You always did worry too much," she whispered. Harry watched with a pained expression. "They're talking to each other," he murmured. "Not with words, but they are." Zoe nodded. "Some bonds don't need language." They resumed the walk. Solomon's breathing grew heavier as they approached the veterinary wing, but he stayed close, refusing to lag behind. His worn body bore the strain, but his spirit, the part tied directly to Eleanor, kept pulling him forward. At last they reached the clinic's side entrance, a quiet door normally used for late-night emergencies. Staff had already cleared the interior room, laying down clean, padded flooring and dimming the lights to create a calming space. Eleanor stepped inside first, her cane tapping softly against the tile. When Solomon followed, he paused in the threshold, inhaling deeply as though sensing the gravity of the moment. His tail swept the ground once. He then crossed into the room and settled beside Eleanor without hesitation. Zoe closed the door gently behind them, sealing off the noise of the outside world. Inside, the air felt warm, still, reverent. Eleanor lowered herself into a padded chair, exhaling shakily. Solomon lay down at her feet, his massive head resting near her knees. When she reached forward to stroke his mane, he closed his eyes with a sigh deep enough to echo through the hearts of everyone watching. Harry stood near the door, hands clasped in front of him. "I'll brief the board," he said quietly. "They won't like it, but they're going to hear it anyway." "They'll ask us to separate them," a nurse whispered. Zoe shook her head. "Not today." Harry nodded firmly. "Not today," he said. "Not now, not at the end." And as the room settled into gentle silence, the truth became something no rule could deny. Sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to honor a bond that never should have been broken. The faint hum of the veterinary center's lights softened into the background as evening folded itself gently around the small, makeshift sanctuary. Staff moved quietly through the hallway, speaking in hushed tones, their footsteps muffled on the padded floor. No alarms, no shouting, no urgency, only the kind of reverence reserved for moments too fragile to disturb. Inside the room, Eleanor sat in the padded recliner the team had prepared for her, though her body slumped slightly to one side as fatigue pressed down with increasing weight. Solomon lay on the floor beside her, his enormous frame curled imperfectly around the chair, his mane brushing the blanket draped over her lap. His breaths came deep and heavy, each one rattling softly in his chest. Eleanor reached down with trembling fingers, touching the place between his ears, where his fur still felt softest. "You always slept like this," she murmured. "Pressed right up against me, just like when you were little." Solomon shifted, exhaling a low rumble. Not a warning, not pain, but a slow, comforting sound that vibrated through the floor and into Eleanor's bones. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the vibration settle into her chest, calming her heartbeat the way it once calmed his. Dr. Zoe stood behind the glass window, watching with a hand pressed to her lips. Each rise and fall of Solomon's chest told her what his blood work had already confirmed. He was fading. The old lion had pushed far beyond what most lions endure, fighting with a determination only love could give. But even love could not hold back time. Harry Dalton entered quietly, shoulders sagging from a day that had stretched longer and heavier than any emergency he'd ever handled. "How is she?" he asked Zoe. Zoe exhaled. "Weak, very weak." Then softer. "And ready." Harry stared into the room, his jaw tightening as he took in the sight of the fragile woman and the old lion leaning into one another like the two halves of a memory, too heavy to carry alone. "They shouldn't have had to wait 30 years for this," he whispered. Zoe nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. But at least they didn't lose each other now. Back inside the room, the overhead lights were dimmed to a warm amber glow. Eleanor's breathing had grown shallower, each inhale pulling slightly harder than the last. She felt her heart flutter in her chest, a warning she had learned to recognize during months of living with failing health. But it didn't frighten her now, not with Solomon beside her. Her fingers brushed over the bony ridge above his eye. "You found me," she whispered. "After all this time, you found me." Solomon raised his head slowly, his neck trembling with effort. He nudged Eleanor's forearm gently, a tender, familiar motion that made her eyes close in gratitude. When she opened them again, she smiled, a soft, tired smile that held more peace than anything she had felt in years. Megan Chu slipped into the room, holding a folded blanket to her chest. She looked small and timid, guilt still clinging to her, but she placed the blanket at the foot of the recliner anyway. I thought it might make her more comfortable," she whispered. Eleanor looked up at her with kind, tired eyes. "Thank you, dear," she murmured. "You didn't do anything wrong today. Sometimes, life just brings us where we need to be." Tears welled in Megan's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak, and stepped carefully back out of the room. Zoe approached Eleanor with gentle steps. "Do you want to move to the floor?" she asked. "We can help you lie beside him if you'd like." Eleanor's gaze drifted down to Solomon. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to be next to him, like before." With utmost care, Zoe and a hospice nurse helped Eleanor rise from the recliner. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she didn't resist. Solomon tensed, trying to rise as well, but his body failed him, and he let out a low, frustrated groan. "No, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered, cupping his cheek. You stay right there." The staff eased her down onto the thick cushion beside him. The moment her frail body settled against his, Solomon shifted with visible effort, positioning himself so that he could curl around her more fully. His massive head lowered onto her shoulder, just as he had done decades earlier as a frightened cub warmed by her voice and hands. Eleanor sighed, not from pain, but from a profound release. "There you are," she breathed. "My boy, my sonny." Solomon let out a soft, wavering rumble that trembled through the room like a final lullaby. The lights were dimmed even further, leaving only a faint, golden halo around them. Harry stepped back from the window, unable to watch any longer without breaking. Zoe stayed, one hand pressed against the glass, her breath unsteady. Inside, Eleanor's hand moved weakly through Solomon's mane, her fingers gliding through strands of fur that had turned silver with age. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not with you here." Solomon nudged closer, his breathing uneven now, his chest rising in short, shallow motions. His tail twitched once, then stilled. Eleanor turned her face slightly toward his, her forehead touching the edge of his mane. "Thank you," she murmured, "for waiting for me, for remembering me, for coming home." Her fingers slackened slightly as her arm settled gently across his neck. A long moment passed. Then Eleanor drew one last soft breath and did not take another. Solomon sensed the change instantly. His body stiffened, his ears lifted halfway. A sound, a deep trembling moan rose from his chest. It was not fierce, it was not loud, but it carried a grief older than any language. He pressed his face against her still shoulder, nudged once, twice, whimpered softly. Outside the glass, Zoe covered her mouth, the tears falling freely now. Harry leaned his forehead against the wall, shoulders shaking. Solomon lay perfectly still afterward, his breathing slowing into a long, exhausted rhythm. He did not leave her side. He did not move away. He stayed curled around the woman he had searched for, remembered, and finally found, even as her spirit slipped gently from the room. Minutes passed. An hour. The night deepened, and the old lion kept his silent vigil beside the only home he had ever known. No one in the veterinary wing slept. Not the security officers stationed in the hall, not the nurses who tiptoed past the door, not Dr. Zoe, who sat with her elbows on her knees and her face buried in her trembling hands. Even Harry Dalton, a man who'd weathered decades of emergency response without shedding a tear, stood in the quiet corridor with his eyes fixed on the floor, jaw clenched against the ache in his chest. Inside the dimly lit room, time seemed to stand perfectly still. Solomon's breath rose and fell in slow, uneven waves. His head remained on Eleanor's shoulder, his muzzle tucked gently against the blanket covering her chest. The warmth had already begun to leave her body, but Solomon stayed pressed close, as though refusing to let the darkness take her completely. Every so often, he nudged her softly. A small whimper escaped him, a sound no one who heard it would ever forget. Not a roar, not a growl, but the quiet, breaking sound of an old heart grieving with its last strength. Hours passed, marked only by the occasional shudder of wind outside or the soft humming of the building's heating system. When dawn finally began to bloom across the edge of the sky, the soft gold light seeped through the small window, casting a warm glow over the room. It illuminated the silver in Solomon's mane, the fine lines on Eleanor's peaceful face, the slow rise of dust motes dancing through the still air. Zoe stepped quietly inside. She knelt beside Solomon, placing one hesitant hand on his paw, not forcing him to move, not urging him away, just offering presence. "She's gone, sweetheart," she whispered gently. "She's at peace now." Solomon did not lift his head. Zoe felt tears slip down her cheeks. She brushed one away and looked at him, truly looked. She saw more than age, more than illness. She saw a creature who had remembered, who had carried love across decades, who had found his way back to it at the very end. "Take your time," she murmured. "We're not taking you from her." Behind her, Megan stood in the doorway with a box of tissues clutched to her chest. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with dried tears. "Dr. Zoe," she whispered, "we have people gathering outside the gates. News must have spread. Reporters, visitors leaving flowers, cards." Zoe nodded weakly. "Let them wait." The world outside could pause. History could wait. Grief could not. Near mid-morning, Solomon finally shifted. His breath rattled harder, his limbs trembling beneath him. He lifted his head from Eleanor's shoulder with great effort, his eyes searching her face as though memorizing it one last time. He nudged her cheek tenderly, his whiskers tracing the curve of her jaw. Zoe swallowed back a cry. Solomon let out a long, low exhale. Then he lowered himself beside her again, this time not curled protectively, but resting in soft surrender. His great head lay upon her arm. Minutes passed. Then his breath slowed, softened, faltered. Zoe moved quickly to his side, but she did not touch him. She could not bring herself to interrupt this final moment, not when his entire world had just slipped away. Solomon lifted his eyes once more toward Eleanor, gazing at her with a tenderness that felt impossibly human. His chest rose a final time, then eased into stillness. Zoe pressed trembling fingers to her lips as Solomon exhaled his last breath. He passed quietly, peacefully, with his head resting on the woman who had once saved his life and whose love had carried him gently into the end of his own. By noon, the zoo had fallen into profound silence. Thousands of messages poured in from around the country. People who had never met Solomon or Eleanor but felt their story in the softest, most human part of themselves. Letters, drawings, prayers, memories of beloved pets and aging parents and rescues long gone. Messages about forgiveness, about reunion, about the miracle of being remembered. In the weeks that followed, the Portland Evergreen Zoo built a small memorial garden near Solomon's former habitat. A bronze statue was placed in its center, a lion resting his head against the shoulder of an elderly woman sitting beside him. It captured the moment of purest truth between them, the moment love outweighed fear, rules, and time itself. Visitors came from all over, some silent, some openly crying. At the base of the statue, an inscription was carved into smooth stone. "Love doesn't fade. It remembers." And every morning, as the mist drifted through the garden and sunlight filtered through the fir trees, the statue stood as an impossible reminder. A lion broke free. A woman stood still. And love, persistent, loyal, undimmed by decades, found its way back, just in time. Eleanor and Solomon had taken different paths through life, but in the end, they walked each other home. If this story touched your heart even a little, let me know by dropping a simple 1 in the comments. No need for long words, just one number to say you're here, and you felt something too. And if you'd like more true, emotional wildlife stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and stay with this community. There are many more journeys, many more reunions, and many more hearts waiting to be found. Your presence here means more than you know.